Hello everyone, welcome to another video. This time I'm going to be trying to cover basically the basis of the story of Nioh. And in this video I'm going to be covering certain characters, mostly the main character, just the basis of the story. So let's start off in the beginning. William, Sir William, or Anjin, as the Japanese call him, he starts off in a jail cell, and the reason why he starts off in this jail cell is because his past was he was a pirate for the Queen's army, and they hire him as a mercenary group to steal this Amrita. And once they do this, he gets this Amrita back to England, and he gives it to him, and this is how England defeats the Spanish forces. This is the Spanish Armada. This is how they kind of put it into the story. Now, after this, he realizes that they use this and they want to keep this a secret. So they imprison him and his entire crew into this giant tower, impenetrable and whatnot. And this is how basically the story ends up. This is how he ends up in the jail cell. So, in this entirety of being in this jail cell, he's the last one alive of his crew, basically. So when you go when you're exploring this original area, you'll realize that you come across this torture dungeon. And when you look around here, you start to realize these seem like the tortured warriors or tortured pirates that could have been your crew. It's purely speculation, but that's kind of how I see it. So your entire crew is basically dead. Now, another thing about this story is his guardian spirit that gets stolen by Kelly. Kelly's whole goal in this game is to revive a warlord, basically tear up this, era, just become dominator of the era. He's not exactly the main character in the story, the person that controls everything, as you find out later in the game, but his entire goal is to come into this rich land of Amrita, which is Japan. Now, William's guardian spirit, she actually is the reason why he can revive, and they kind of throw that in there to make sure that you think, oh, this is how he revives and everything. This is why he comes back. His whole goal is to get this person back, and they kind of hint saying she could be a friend or a very close friend or even more if you read the description of her summoning guardian spirit at, close to the end of the game. Now, going through this, you'll realize that William's name all of a sudden becomes Anjin, as they say. This is because, short in the story, they say that his original name, Sir William, is hard to pronounce to them, and it's kind of just in the text randomly. So they decide to call him Anjin, which means pilot, basically, and that is, pilot as in pilot of a boat, not so much pilot of a ship, of an airplane or anything, because past. So Kelly's, sorry, Kelly is very hectic on reviving Nobunaga and just creating this warlord to basically obey him. But in the end, Nobunaga is strong enough to, even though he becomes yokai, he kind of just disobeys Kelly, and so it kind of sends Kelly into this fritz that puts him into summoning this giant yokai, the biggest yokai actually, which is the second to last boss of these serpents that kind of just surround everything like that. And you realize that this is basically the last you'll see of this version of Kelly. And William's story, he has the person back, he has his summoning, his guardian spirit back after this point. However, the story kind of continues after this to kind of fill in those plot holes, I guess you could say. And a lot of the in-between of this story isn't too interesting. It's mostly feudal Japan. It's mostly, these warlords fighting and why Oda Nobunaga is such a hard person, just in general, a demonic person, and I'll explain his in a little bit. But once you get back to the Castle of London, you start to see that the story starts to piece together that Kelly is actually just an alchemic creation basically, in this game, and there's multiple of him in these containers just before you find the last boss. So it kind of just shows you, oh, Kelly's actually not the main antagonist of this story. It's another guy, basically, under the Queen's control. And you're going to see him in a bit after all of this. So I'm going to take this time to explain Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga, around 1600, 1700, was a warlord of Japan who was assassinated by his own people, basically, his own trusted person. But his backstory in reality is he actually, they say he became almost possessed close to his life. He just all of a sudden just flipped a switch. People say that he had a different look in his eyes, or even saw that he was possessed through his eyes, and that was just kind of their belief in that. So he became this kind of ruthless, just killer in past Japan, if that makes any sense. He slaughters multiple people just to send out a message, and you see that kind of in the loading screens of this entire thing. And if you just look him up a little bit, you'll notice that at one point in his life, he actually does snap. He just becomes an entirely different person. And that's kind of why he is one of the main characters in this story, just because he has such a big presence to the yokai and everything like that. So this last boss is actually the eye of Queen Elizabeth, or the entire Foundation. And with Queen Elizabeth dead at this point in the game, she dies from depression, as the story says. This guy, at the end, basically has the idea to take over completely. He's going to use all of these alchemic creations, use yokai to their full potential, and use all this Amrita that he's gained from, Kelly's expedition, and just sending out all these guys, because Kelly is actually considered, an undiable person just because he can keep getting reborn in these chambers. But with all of this, you kind of just destroy this entire plan. So William kind of leaves a lot of people behind at the end. He doesn't. It kind of leaves a basis to the almost the second game, if you will. After you finish the main game, it kind of shows him going back to Japan, but it doesn't. It's kind of an open basis on, you think he's going back and he's going to save him. So it's not really a hard fact that there's going to be a second one. Although it's there can be, basically. The most you get end game is Way of the Strong, which is like 3 different regions, and they're all amped up, and you can get a bunch of divine gear, which is shown at the end. And these pieces of gear obviously are a bit strong, or really much stronger, but these missions are going to be 160 plus. So just be prepared for all of that when you beat this game. In reality, this game, it doesn't have a whole lot of story other than, past historical documents and everything like that. The real person that has a huge story behind him is William and Kelly mostly, but William also has a decent story. His family's murdered by a group of pirates or bandits, and the reason why he lives is because he falls in the water. He meets this guardian spirit, and she's the one who just resurrects him and warns him of his impending death, so he knows, basically. But he honestly can't die. He's just, invincible in that way. Just as long as he believes in her, he will live forever, basically. So the last boss, his name is 100 Eyes. I'm not sure if he actually gives you his true name when you're talking to him. Sorry, I didn't look into that too much. He probably does. But this is the main antagonist of the story. This is the guy that controls Kelly. This is the guy who sends him out to Japan. This is the guy who's trying to conquer the world. This is the guy who, in speculation, led to the Queen's death. He kind of hints at it, but you don't really know. And yeah, that's kind of the story of this game in general. There's a little bit more to it, but this is the basic story, the basic setup of the game from kind of start to finish. There's a bunch in between. Some of it's useless, some of it's good, but it's not too bad. It's mostly just historical, because that's a lot what the game is based off of. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Yeah, and have a good day. Hope this was good.